Here I'm going to be looking at 2020 Vision, which was published by the Nomad Letterpress in 2020. And the conceit of this book is that 2020 was the centenary of the Society of Wood Engravers, and an honorary member of that society named Nigel Hamway has pulled together 19 contemporary engravers and placed examples of their work alongside examples of work from the artists they said inspired them. And so what we have here is a documentation both of the contemporary state of wood engraving and also the history, the lineage of engraving over the last century that carried us to this point that we find ourselves at today. The book was limited to 340 copies. Of those, 290 were the C state, which is what I have here, which were quarter bound in this yellow cloth, which has this linen-like texture, and then has these paper sides which are printed with this repeating pattern that is itself based on a wood engraving. There's a paper title label on the spine, and the book comes inside of a slipcase that's wrapped in grey paper and has yellow cloth ends to match the cloth that's used here on the binding. So let's dive in and see what's going on inside the book. So the first thing we see is we have this fun bit of ephemera that reminds us that 2020 was an unusual year in many ways, and we have this nice wood engraving here of the coronavirus. And then turning into the book itself, we have the half title and again this print that we also saw on the front boards, and then we have the main title page. We have the title of the volume here printed in two colours. I really like this combination of black and teal print. I think it's a very tasteful but also a slightly modern touch to the book. And we see here the basic idea that I explained already, that we have 19 engravers, one collector, Nigel Hamway, who pulled them together along with the artists who inspired them. And facing the title page we have a frontispiece, which is a photographic print on this tipped in glossy photographic paper based on this design here, and in a few moments we will see the wood engraving on which this is based, and we'll see a real print of the real thing. So that's the title page. Next up, after the table of contents, we have two introductions. The first introduction is written by Nigel Hamway, who describes the process of compiling this particular collection of engravers and engravings together. And then we have an introduction by Pat Randall, who is the proprietor of the Nomad Letterpress, and he describes the physical production process of printing this particular book. If you're interested in printing, which if you're looking at this kind of book you almost certainly are, then that's really a fun read, and you hear about some of the challenges involved in printing a book like this, especially when the artists, as you might expect, would like their work to be presented in the best possible fashion. And then without further ado, we go straight into the collection of the engravings, and each of our 19 engravers occupies a 4-page section in the book. So we start with a page like this one. We have the names of the inspired engraver and the artist who inspired them, and then we have a collection of paragraphs written by the contemporary engraver in which they describe how they got into engraving, how they came to be inspired by this particular artist. And throughout the book we're going to see again this two-colour printing that I said that I liked so much. So after that introductory text, we get a 2-page spread which has the engravings themselves, first by the inspiring artist and then by the inspired, and presenting them side by side like this really lets you look at the connection between the two. And one thing I find quite striking is that in some cases that connection is very apparent. You can see a clear stylistic lineage from the inspired from the inspirer to the inspired. In other cases that lineage is much less direct and the styles in fact look really quite different. but it's interesting to see where these artists think that they got their inspiration from. And then after we've seen the prints of the engravings, we get a fourth page which has biographical notes on each of the two artists, and also gives us precise information about what exactly are the engravings that we've been just been looking at. And then we go straight into the next pair of artists and the next pair of engravings. And so the book continues through the 19 contemporary engravers who have been solicited for this volume. So in most cases, these engravings are printed directly onto the page, and the paper is Zircon mold-made paper. Anybody who's been watching this channel for any length of time knows that I'm a big fan of this particular type of paper. This copy uses in particular a heavier variant of the paper, so it's really nice and weighty. It's taken the engravings very well, and it has a good rag content, so the paper also feels nice to handle. The top edge is trimmed, but the bottom and fore edges have this deckled edge. I said most of the engravings are printed on directly onto the zircon paper, but there are exceptions for a couple of reasons. So the first is that sometimes we have these engravings that are simply too big to fit onto the page of the book. And in that case, we get these tipped-in engravings that are printed separately on this paper, as you see here, and then we can fold them out and we can see these really large engravings in all of their impressive glory. This one in particular, you may notice, is the engraving that was represented also in that print that we saw as the frontispiece. So here we have the real deal, and I should say that all of these engravings have been printed directly from the original wood blocks, and the quality of reproduction is really superb, extremely clear, excellent printing on all of these engravings. So if you happen to be a fan of wood engraving, not only is this a very nice and potentially historically important collection of engravings, but also you get to see them really in all of their glory straight from the block, and it's really a marvelous sight to behold. So here we have another example again of a tipped in very large engraving. Let me try and find some other interesting things that are going on here. So here we have another example where we have an engraving here on the right, which is printed in two colours. That is an engraving by Richard Wagner, and his inspiration here in fact wasn't an engraving at all, but this piece of artwork, which has therefore not been printed from the block but is photographically reproduced and is printed on this glossy photographic paper which is tipped in. There's one other fun example that I'd like to show you a bit later in the book, which is this one here. So here on the left we have Simon Lawrence, who is the proprietor of the Fleece Press, and so what Simon has done is print this entire pamphlet using his own press. It has a couple of engravings and some text on it. It uses a very nice paper in its own right, and I think it's really fun to have this output of the Fleece Press, which itself has been important in keeping interest in the art form of engraving alive, to have that pamphlet here tipped right into the book. So I found that a lot of fun as well. And again, I've said it already, but it bears repeating. In all of the cases here, the quality of reproduction for these engravings is absolutely first rate. And it's such a distraction that one could almost forget to talk about the typographical design of the book, which is itself, I think, superb. I already mentioned the two colour printing. You can see there's generous leading on the text here, so it's really can be read in a very relaxed fashion. But the whole design of the book, you know, you have these lines here. Somehow it gives the design a sort of modern edge, and yet it doesn't prevent the book from looking quite elegant and sophisticated. So I'm also a big fan of the typographical design of the book. One other thing I should say is that I mentioned Nigel Hamway pulled together 19 engravers along with their artistic inspiration. But you see here we actually have a 20th section, which is a bit of a treat because here Nigel himself has pulled together 2 engravers that were important for him. And so it's almost like we get a bonus pair of engravings included here at the end of the book, which is a fun additional treat. And then as soon as we're done with the 20 pairs of engravings, we, as usual for this type of volume, have a Colophon page. It describes the 3 different editions that I talked about at the beginning of the video. You can see here that it was printed in Perpetua on Zircon paper at the Whittington Press where Nomad Letterpress is based. I should say that Nomad Letterpress hasn't been going for that long, and anyone who's watched these videos knows that I'm a big fan of the Whittington Press's work, so those are some pretty big boots to fill. But if this book is anything to go by, boy is Pat Randall on the right trajectory, because this is really a superb example of book design and book production, in my opinion. Absolutely first rate. If you're interested in wood engravings, this is just a beautiful way to experience them. And if you're merely a collector of fine books, this is really a fantastic example of I think the very best of 21st century book production and design. So I think you couldn't go very far wrong picking a copy of 2020 Vision up. So I hope you enjoyed the video. That was 2020 Vision by Pat Randall at the Nomad Letterpress.